Yesterday we were speaking about the preparation to go into the land of Israel and how there's this principle, Machda Eretz Yisrael, that every one of us has a responsibility to turn our own environment into a holy place like Israel is a holy country. So we learned yesterday that in this week's parasha we're going to read about the division, how the land was split up between the 12 tribes. And in order to do that, they made a lottery. And Hashem makes this unusual miracle that as they pulled out each piece of paper with the name of a tribe, or the piece of paper with the name of a portion of land that was supposed to relate to that tribe, the miracle was that this piece of paper actually shouted out and said, I am allocation X, and I belong to tribe Y. So the question was, who needs such a miracle? Hashem's not a show-off. He doesn't do miracles to impress us. So the question is, why this particular miracle? Why is it necessary for the thing to cry out and to shout? So by way of introduction to that, you have to appreciate that obviously this lottery is not the actual division of the land of Israel. The lottery is the preparation for later when they would get into Israel, and then they would divide the land. Which raises a very interesting point. How important is the preparation for a mitzvah? Because the mitzvah is to conquer the land. The mitzvah is to transform Canaan, which was a place of paganism and of promiscuity, into the Holy Land. So that's the mitzvah. Now, in this parasha, we're only talking about the hachana, the preparation to the mitzvah that happens beforehand. Very often, people take the attitude, it doesn't really matter how you get there, as long as you get there, right? You don't have to focus so much attention on the steps of preparation as long as the final product is aligned with what Hashem wants. That's not the Torah's view. The Torah's view is that everything is designed and therefore everything is part of the process. If Hashem has designed a process which requires these steps of preparation, then that means that these steps of preparation are relevant and significant, and that applies to every mitzvah across the board. For example, he has an example that we can all relate to in our own lives. So a person is only obligated to fulfill mitzvahs from the age of bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, right? So when a person is a child, what we do as parents and as educators is we teach the children so that when they get to bar and bat mitzvah, they'll know what to do. So here's the question. The process of chinuch, education, is it a means to an end? In other words, practically, if you want a kid at the age of 13 to start to do things, you have to tell him about it beforehand. So is it just a practicality, a means to an end? Or is chinuch, education, actually part of how you serve Hashem? So I think it goes without saying, nobody would deny this, that education is part of how we serve Hashem. The way we educate children, that's part of the service. And the mitzvahs that these children do before they're obligated to do the mitzvahs, although they're not obligated, those mitzvahs still have value. So what we see is that in Judaism, everything is set up very specifically, including the preparation that you make for an experience. The preparation becomes part of the experience. If this is devised by Torah, if this is mandated by Torah, then it means that it is part of the process, not just a prep for the process. So that tells us that the preparation prior to going into the land of Israel, which included the division using this lottery, is part of the preparation and therefore part of the mitzvah. So why is that? Why is it that in Torah, we can bring evidence and I can quote other examples that illustrate this point. For example, in the Beis Hamikdash, at a time when a person was a kohen and had to bring an offering, even the steps that he took while walking the different parts of the animal or the blood or whatever it was, that was part of the mitzvah, even though technically it's only a preparation for the mitzvah. But if a person did not have the right intentions at any of those preparatory steps, it could have derailed the whole thing. And various other examples, but you get the point. So why is that? Why did Hashem place so much emphasis on the preparation? Let's focus on getting the job done. Who cares on how you got to that point? And the reason for this is because we have a principle in Judaism that when you do something of meaning, you're supposed to do it with complete investment. That means we're not, as Jewish people, We're not supposed to kind of just float along through life, doing activities, racking up points for doing mitzvahs. The goal is to be invested in the experience. The experience should be holistic. So, for example, if you think about how we live a lot of the time, we tend to what they call multitask. In other words, we tend to be completely distracted. That's basically what it is. What people boast about multitasking. Actually, what they mean is, I'm doing one thing, but my mind is not completely on that thing because I'm busy just checking an email or a WhatsApp or the score on the latest soccer game or having another conversation on the side. We actually find it quite difficult to be fully invested in an experience while we're going through the experience. It's interesting. And maybe they didn't have this problem so much in previous generations, but for sure in our generation, it's a big thing. We find it very difficult to be completely invested. And the goal of Judaism is that whatever we do, we should be totally invested in whatever it is that we do. Completely invested. And the reason for that is, why is it so important to be completely invested? Because the goal of spirituality and Judaism and Torah and mitzvahs is to bring holiness into ourselves, and then by extension to bring holiness into the world that we live in. So you don't want to leave part of us out of that experience. If the goal is to bring holiness into myself, I want my whole self to be engaged with that holiness. If the goal is to bring holiness into my world, I want my whole world to be involved in that holiness. So if there's a part of me that's not involved, then that part of me is not taken along for the ride, and that part of me is not elevated. That's why, for example, you'll notice, why do Jews sway when we daven? You ever wondered about this? Somebody sent me an article yesterday that says, because everybody's in whatever, lockdown, stay at home, depending exactly where you live in the world, so people are not as active as they should be. So there's a product you can get now, it's called a mini exercise bike. So it's basically pedals, and you put it under your desk at work, and while you're working, you're pedaling. So you can keep active even while you're sitting at your desk. I said, we don't need that. As Jews, we don't need that. Because the minute we sit down at a desk, we already start chuckling. We start moving. Why? Why do Jews sway when we daven? Or when we learn? Why do we have to daven aloud? Pronounce the words. Why do we have to learn Torah aloud? It's a bizarre thing. If you're not used to it, you could walk into a room and there's a person sitting all by themselves with a Gemara open in front of them, and they're speaking loud as if there's a group of people in the room. Why? Because typically when a person learns, you use your mind. So your mind is engaged and becomes part of that holy experience. And typically when a person davens, it's with your heart. So your heart becomes part of that experience. But Judaism wants all of us to be involved in the experience. So while we're operating our mind, we also use our mouth. And at the same time we use our mouth, we also move our body. And that's why we gesticulate so much when we learn, because we engage with the whole body in the experience. Because a Jewish person knows that there are three major functions of the human being: machshava, dibur, maaseh, thought, speech, and action. And the goal is, as best as we can, that each time we engage with Hashem and each time we engage with holiness, we want to engage on all of those three key areas: thought and speech and action. And we want to do that not only when we arrive at the destination and say this part of the journey is connected to holiness. We want to take the whole preparation along as well and say the entire build-up to this particular event is also pulled into the holiness. It's all the same theme. In other words, to be Jewish means to try and incorporate as much of our experience into our connection with Hashem as possible. That's why in Torah, not only is the mitzvah itself relevant, but the run-up to the mitzvah is just as relevant. How you prepare, how you clean your house for Pesach, how you build your sukkah, how you prepare for davening, etc. It's all part of the same concept, which is let's bring in as much of our experience as possible into the spiritual experience, into the connection to Hashem. So that's reflected in this story of the lottery to prepare us to go into the land of Israel. Going into the land of Israel is symbolic of elevating material, physical, and maybe even negative things to become holy. The preparation for that, as we've just illustrated, is incredibly important. It's part of the process. So the preparation includes a lottery. What kind of a lottery? So Rashi tells us that they drew the lottery, as I mentioned yesterday, with Elazar, who was the Kohen Gadol, the successor to Aaron, the high priest, standing there with the Urim V'Tumim. Urim V'Tumim was this spiritual conduit that allowed Hashem to share messages with the people. So the stones would light up, and it was a whole process. But basically, it created an opportunity for Hashem to give messages to the people. So the Urim V'Tumim was driven by what is called Ruach HaKodesh, a spirit of divine inspiration. That's the mind. So the mind was engaged in the process of preparing how you're going to divide the land. And not just any mind, but Ruach HaKodesh, an inspired mind, a mind that is plugged into divine energy. Amazing degree of the mind's involvement. On the other extreme, there is action, Maaseh. What's the action? Pulling out the pieces of paper with the different names on, the names of the tribes and the names of the allocations of land. That is the other extreme, exactly as action is meant to be. How does action work? Action does not rely on depth, and it does not rely on perception, and it does not rely on wisdom, and it does not rely on inspiration. Action is action. So action was represented and thought was represented. But in order for the preparation to go into Israel to be a wholesome, holistic preparation, speech had to be involved as well. Because those are the three major areas in which a person is able to express themselves and connect. Therefore, Hashem made a miracle that the paper should also speak. So that the element of speech should be included in this process of preparing us to go into the land and to teach us an incredible lesson. To teach us a lesson that when we want to prepare ourselves to be able to make in our environment, Machdo Eretz Yisrael, to make our environment into a holy place, it means we have to involve all three areas. It's how we think, it's how we behave, but it is also how we speak. If we get our thoughts and our words and our actions aligned with what Hashem wants, that's how we prepare ourselves for a holy life to live in and to radiate to others around us as well. Please God, we should succeed in doing it.